nostalgia shoot, you know?
Yep. Cool guys. Bye.
Alright guys, Murphs here, and today I wanted to discuss my recent first experience with IDPA competitions. Now for those of you who don't know, IDPA stands for International Defensive Pistol Association, and they have been conducting defensively based shooting scenario type competitions since the 70s or 80s, something along those lines, and the entire mindset of these competitions is geared entirely towards how you should prepare to defend yourself in a violent encounter involving firearms. Now, what I want to go over today is specifically some of the things that I went through in the process of getting ready, of assessing the rule book, of which it's a pretty extensive rule book, as well as my thoughts and impressions after having not only gone through the process of preparing, but also actually executing the match. Now, what this is not going to be is a full-on breakdown of every one of the match courses of fire. If you're looking for something like that, go ahead and make that request in the comments section down below, and I will happily make a video covering that particular content. Right now, we're just talking, this is entirely just based towards somebody who's maybe thinking about getting into IDPA, but doesn't have anybody nearby to ask about it, because I don't really know anybody who competes in IDPA. I wasn't entirely sure where to start, so I kind of had to feel along it and figure it all out on my own. All right, now, longtime viewers of the channel know that I have participated in competitions before. However, those have been outlaw or renegade type matches. Now, what are those? Outlaw matches do not follow the same strict rules and policies as IDPA or USPSA or 3-gun or whatever type of other nationally recognized matches you might want to identify with. Outlaw matches are based entirely around local clubs, local gun clubs, or ranges or whatever. And it's really an opportunity for you to be able to come out and train. I like outlaw matches because, one, I get the opportunity to shoot in a manner that I don't normally get to on a static type range. And a lot of these public ranges are not necessarily well set up for that or do not encourage that in their rules and guidelines. And then also it gives me an opportunity to be able to vet my gear, to be able to do like a gear shakeout and see if what it is that I'm doing is the best use, or if I need to change some of my training and prep in between that and the next match. You know, what I need a preference for whenever I'm looking at going to my next course or something along those lines. Now, one of the big things about outlaw matches is that generally they follow the same rules that IDPA or a lot of these other types of pistol associations would follow, but they do not have super strict rules. A lot of it is very much so based on the individual course of fire as to what you can and can't do and all those types of things. It's very much so dealer's choice whenever it comes to what it is that you want to bring gear and gun wise. There are some guidelines that are put out there as far as like the number of magazines that you might want to have available. Is it a 2-gun match or not? Any of those types of things, or whether or not they have the option for you to shoot their matches as just handgun or just rifle or something along those lines. It's also important to identify that these guns or these matches are not broken up into divisions because they're just not that rigid. So you're going to have somebody with a staccato facing off against somebody with a Taurus G3C, and they're going to be racked and stacked against one another. Ideally, we would think that the guy with the staccato is probably going to smoke the guy with the G3C, but that may not be what either one of them is really looking to get out of the competition. This is where I come back to, it's very much so based on what it is that you want to get out of it. So let's say that you are trying to practice for concealed carry because you don't get a lot of opportunity to do that. So you decide you're going to bring your concealed carry setup. You're going to have your concealed carry holster and your magazine pouches set up how you would normally concealed carry them and all those types of things. That's fine. You can do that at an outlaw match. There might be somebody else at that same match who wants to throw on a helmet and a vest and have the super Gucci'd out rifle with a suppressor and all that kind of stuff. And he's looking to maybe either replicate his actual duty type layout, or, perhaps he just wants to come out and LARP and have a good time. Whatever floats your boat in this case. That's one of the things that I really love about outlaw matches. And in general, that is why I compete, is to get the opportunity to be able to be graded on what it is that I'm doing, so that I can take that information, place it against what I hold to be true, and see if I need to change up what it is that I have going on.
Stand by.
Now, previously, I have attempted to sign up for IDPA matches. If you've been on the Murph's Law Facebook page for any amount of time, which, if you're interested in that, link in the description, you might remember me talking about that a little over a year ago. The issue with that match was that it was over an hour away, and they only did matches on Thursdays, which would mean that I would have to get off work at a reasonable hour in order to be able to make it up there. In addition to that, I cannot legally bring personally owned firearms where I work, so I would have had to have made it home, which at least was in the correct direction for getting to that match, but it was still an hour and a half added to the drive because I worked an hour and a half away from home in the opposite direction. So at least I was headed in the right direction, but I had to get home, change, and grab all my guns and equipment, and get up there before the match started. That was a lot of stuff. There was a lot of things that I couldn't control there because I frequently work past what would be normal hours. So I never really bothered trying to get in on those matches up until I had some time off. There happened to be a match going on, and I decided that I would sign up for it. Unfortunately, a snowstorm shut down the match, and I never got a chance to do it again up until now. I now belong, or am a member of a range that hosts 3-gun USPSA and IDPA, and my schedule happened to match up with being able to do this IDPA course. So first off, I had to get back on Practice Score. Now, previously I'd set up a Practice Score account when I attempted to shoot IDPA beforehand. And I kind of forgot all my login information, but I managed to, go through the process of figuring all that out and found the club that was putting on the course, or putting on the competition, and sign up there. Now, I'm not necessarily going to go into some of the rigmarole that I had involved in trying to get a hold of these people to be able to figure all this stuff out, because that's not really a reflection of IDPA as much as the club organization, and they did ultimately help me out. It's just a matter of wording as it would turn out. So with this, we now have to start picking out a couple of different classifications and divisions. So experience-wise, what was I supposed to classify myself as? And they got from novice to grandmaster or something like that. The rule book, which is about 35 pages long for IDPA, outlines time averages and stuff like that in order to be able to identify what classification you fall in. Seeing as I've never shot IDPA before, I think I pretty much solidly have to list myself as novice at that point. One of the interesting things about IDPA is that you get 2 attempts, or you get 2 opportunities to compete before you have to actually become a member of whatever particular club. So that's interesting. So this was my burn on my first opportunity to compete, which also means that I'm not allowed to shoot a qualifier up until it's time for me to join the club, as I understand the rule book. For sure, a first-time shooter cannot shoot a qualifier, which would actually allow me to start getting ranked and all that kind of stuff, which, while I'm not opposed to, is also not necessarily the goal that I'm working towards, being this nationally ranked shooter. Be super awesome if it happened, but I'm just trying to get better, and that's all I'm really worried about, and just taking that one step at a time. So with that, now we also have to look at pistol divisions, of which there's quite a few divisions, and a PCC category. Now, each one of those divisions have a whole bunch of things laid out, a whole bunch of rules laid out as to what your gun has to meet. One of the biggest things about IDPA is that it's supposed to eliminate the gamesmanship, which is so common in competition shooting. So you cannot necessarily bring out a raced out gun that while it might be a fantastic competition shooter, it would be a terrible gun to try to rely on in a defensive type situation. It's too large, or it's finely tuned to the right amount, to the right combination of power factor of your ammunition, as well as how tight you grip the gun and all that kind of stuff. That type of thing is not allowed in IDPA. IDPA is based around boxes, and each classification gets its own box that your firearm has to fit into. In addition to that, there's also rules on any type of external modifications that you can make to the firearm. Some of them including safeties. The disabling of safeties is something that has to be looked into as to what type of safety is being disabled, which is a pretty minutia type thing. It's really, if you are planning on modifying your firearm and competing in IDPA, you need to take a look at what it is that is legal for competition there. So like drop-in triggers and stuff like that. There are rules that cover that as far as what that drop-in trigger can achieve or any of those types of things. Now, something that I actually found quite interesting was that IDPA does allow for a carry optics division, which shouldn't be surprising, but in this day and age, there are people who are still debating whether or not red dots belong on pistols. Now, though I have no dot-equipped pistols, I fully intend to add some into the collection at some point. I have guns that are designated that I will at some point get milled out for an optic. I just haven't gotten around to that point in the many, many projects that I have going on. Just like optics on rifles, optics in general are a force multiplier for whatever it is that you're trying to do. Faster sight acquisition, longer range, positive identification of the target, let alone more successful engagement of that target. There's a lot that can be done when you add optics to a weapon. And it just blows my mind that people still debate whether or not they are a critical asset on a handgun. When you look at the sheer amount of like law enforcement and special forces and military personnel who are utilizing red dots, I think the proof is in the pudding right there. But I digress. Let's go ahead and get back on subject here. Now, there's also magazine capacity limitations and size limitations. What are some of the categories involved in these divisions? So you have like your carry optics, as we mentioned before. You have standard service pistol. You have concealed defensive pistol. Bug and Bug R. Now, what are those? Those are the backup gun categories, covering both semi-autos and Bug R being for snub-nose revolvers. You can bring your backup gun and shoot a competition with it. That's pretty cool. They also have a revolver category, which I found very odd that it was limited to 6 rounds. Specifically because the Smith & Wesson Model 686 Plus, there's a version of the Ruger GP100 that is chambered in .357 and holds 7 rounds. Why would these guns not be legal when they are factory options? This is not something you have to special order. They are available at a wide variety of gun shops. It confuses me as to how they could be so progressive in the carry optics division and yet completely ignore a perfectly viable version of the revolver. It just kind of blows my mind. It's not what I would have expected, and that'll get into impressions and thoughts later on in the video. So looking over a lot of these options, I also found it interesting that there was a duty gear division, which would allow for like law enforcement or military to be able to bring their battle belts and free them from the garment type aspect of it, which we'll talk about here in a moment. That's super interesting to me. It's something that I would definitely like to indulge in at some point whenever it is that I get the opportunity. However, also how I run my duty belt is very different to what would actually be conducive to these types of competitions, so maybe it's something I should just leave alone. Now, the PCC category would be really cool if it wasn't so heavily limited, because I do have a PCC, but it is shorter than what is allowed for those competitions, and that confuses me. Now, there's also the specialty division, which are for guns that don't neatly fit into the other categories, but could be allowed in a competition. So with this, I decided to go with the standard service pistol classification. We'll talk about what guns and equipment and stuff like that I brought out here in just a little bit. I want to primarily focus on the build up here. So I picked SSP as a novice, and I started looking deeper into what equipment is allowed, and there is a lot to be discussed when it comes to that. The biggest thing about IDPA is that there's a lot of mention of the concealment garment, which is appropriate when we're talking about self-defense type situations and training. Now, how a lot of it makes it sound as though you're wearing some sort of outer layer over top of your clothing, which I found kind of funny because that's like a very 70s or 80s principle that the concealed carry practitioner is walking around in like a fly fishing vest so that he can wear an outside the waistband holster and no one will be the wiser or anything along those lines, which that's like a clear indicator that somebody's concealed carrying in this day and age. I'm not big on outer layers, and it sounds kind of weird to say that, but I am perfectly comfortable with being uncomfortable to a certain extent in the elements. So like if it's raining and I'm just going into stores and stuff like that, running my weekend errands or anything along those lines, I am unlikely to wear a raincoat because it's just a short walk from wherever I am in the parking lot to the store. I can get a little wet. It's not going to kill me. It's not that big a deal. The only thing that really bothers me is that, obviously splashing on my hearing aids isn't necessarily the best thing, but I can drop those in a pocket until I get into the store. If I'm going to spend an extended period of time outdoors, I'll throw on a raincoat. I keep a raincoat in my truck as part of my just basic everyday loadout and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not going to default to wearing a raincoat just because there's the threat of rain. In addition to that, when the weather gets cooler, it takes me quite a while to put a jacket on. And even if I'm wearing a jacket, I'm still going to evaluate, like, how much time do I really need this jacket? I'm just popping into the store real quick. Do I need a jacket to cross the parking lot? Well, if it's in the middle of winter and it's snowing and all that kind of stuff, yeah, I should probably just be intelligent for a minute and put a coat on. But I'm going to actively look for opportunities to shed that additional layer. Because as much as I'm fine with being somewhat cold, knowing that I can add layers, I really don't like being hot and not having the opportunity to shed layers. If I'm wearing an outside the waistband holster in conjunction with the coat, I'm going to feel very restricted in being able to shed that layer. I would just as soon go ahead and wear an inside the waistband holster, clear the additional garment out of my way, and do what it is that I need to do. And when the weather gets cold, I train around having to do that. Does it slow down my draw a little bit? Absolutely. Does it still have me concealed carrying in all conditions that I might find myself in? Yes, and that's the adaptability that I need in my situation. So when I see somebody talking about in a competition having to wear an outer garment and it's August and very hot outside, I'm like, really? You guys are wearing outer garments in this? That seems ridiculous. So I built around my entire concept for how I would normally conceal carry. Now, guys, when I go to the range, I wear t-shirts and lighter wear and all that kind of stuff. It's something that I don't mind necessarily getting dirty or potentially damaged or anything along those lines. However, when I go out about my daily tasks and all that kind of stuff, and I haven't been to the range, I wear some type of collared shirt. Which, generally, the collared shirts give me opportunity to be able to conceal carry larger firearms, as opposed to when I'm wearing the t-shirts and stuff like that, I have to carry a little bit smaller guns in order to not print as much and all those types of things. Now, a standard service pistol, for what falls into that category, which is a gun of 15 rounds, tends to be pretty large. So I was going to wear a t-shirt to be comfortable at the range, but I was going to be a little bit more bulky around my concealed carry gear, more so than I would normally be. But one of the big qualifiers about whether or not your garment is concealing is if you hold your arms out at shoulder height, whether or not any of your equipment is visible. As long as it's not visible, you're good to go. So I made sure to select a shirt that I would be able to conceal my overall setup and still be legal for the range or for the competition. All right, guys, so I had my classification picked out. I had my plan for how it was that I was going to array myself for going to the competition. Let's go ahead and talk about showing up at the competition, because I still had a lot of questions, a little bit of trepidation as to, how many rounds did I really need to bring? It's recommended that, or the stages are supposed to be built around less than 150 rounds, but also, that's kind of down to the individual person to decide how many rounds they want to put into each target in order to make sure that they are getting the A-zone hits that they need. One of the great things IDPA does is that they do a newcomer's brief, right? Super early during range setup and all that kind of stuff. And that is your opportunity to be able to ask a whole bunch of questions and get into the nitty gritty of, equipment and guns and all that kind of stuff, which are hopefully things that you would have figured out before you got to the range so that you're not showing up all messed up on what it is that you're supposed to be carrying. But it's also a time to be able to clarify what the procedures are and what procedural hits will be, because there's a lot of those involved in IDPA. IDPA, again, with this built in this whole developing an offensive mindset process and all that kind of stuff, it is built on an order of preference for engagement. So if you were to start the stage with a whole bunch of targets arrayed out in front of you, you would have to engage from nearest to furthest. And then whatever order, if you have targets that are more or less right in line with each other, you get to decide in what order you engage them. But there's a significant amount of distance between them, like more than 2 feet. You have to engage from closest to furthest. In addition to that, if you're working around cover, you have to pie that corner and engage targets as you see them. So if you just swing around the corner, let's say there's 2 targets around that corner, you swing around that corner and are exposed to both targets and engage both of those targets, you just got hit with a procedural because you overexposed yourself. You are only supposed to pie that corner until you get that first target, take him out, and then continue pieing that corner until you get to the second target. These are big things in IDPA, and that does make a certain amount of sense. You don't get to just pop around and just have those shorter motions in order to be able to make it from target to target. That is gamesmanship. I understand that. I can appreciate that distinction. It's going to play a part later on, though. In addition to that, reloads are supposed to be conducted from behind cover because obviously standing out in the open when you don't have to conduct a reload means that you have no rounds to be able to return fire and you're going to get shot. So, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I can appreciate that. Now, they also brought up the boxes and all that kind of stuff and clarified what it was that we could or couldn't carry given the individual divisions and all that type of thing. But what I noticed, and I was very confused about for a little bit as I looked around, was that everybody was walking around with pistol belts on. Magazine pouches and holsters and all that kind of stuff were just kind of like openly displayed. And I wasn't seeing a lot of concealment garment being used. And I turned to the guy who was directing the match and was like, "Hey man, we can do this from concealment, right?" And he's like, "Yeah, of course." Okay, you're saying that like I'm the crazy person, but you know, this is looking, I don't feel like I'm the crazy one here. Now, once the match started, all of a sudden everyone started breaking out these jackets and stuff like that to throw over top of their equipment. So there it was. There was the 1980s style way of dressing that all these guys were utilizing to conceal their firearms. However, at least one other guy and myself were the ones, you know, putting our guns underneath t-shirts and all that kind of stuff. So at least I wasn't alone in that. Now, holsters and stuff like that. Holsters and magazine pouches are things that are expressly covered in the rule book. Magazine pouches have to be in a specific position on the belt relative to clock positions, and your magazine pouches have to be attached to your belt, which is unfortunate for me because I wear Vertex concealment pants, which have built-in mag pouches, which are able to hold up to an AR-15 magazine, which is, if I'm carrying spare magazines while I'm concealed carrying, that's where they are. So that kind of annoyed me, but the rules do specify attached to your belt in the specific positions that were previously mentioned. Now also, holsters play a really big part. Holsters cannot be cross-draw type arrangements. They cannot be shoulder holsters. There's a whole lot of different things that are not allowed for IDPA competitions. So you definitely have to be aware of the rule book and what it is that you can and can't do. There's a big thing for being able to reholster without bringing your other hand in to be able to open up the holster. That's definitely something you have to pay attention to if you're not using either a very rigid leather or Kydex. So keep that in mind there, guys. All right, so at that point, I felt pretty confident in running the setup that I was going to run and going into the competition. What did I bring out for the competition? Well, the primary gun that I brought out to compete with was this FN High Power Mark III chambered in 9mm. Now, longtime viewers of the channel have seen this gun pop up multiple times. This has been in my bedside gun video. This has been in the guns that I've used for competition video, and I also use this gun in the revolvers versus semi-automatic pistols video. This was the very first gun that I ever actually competed with. And though I don't often carry it anymore, I did quite a bit at one point. Now I've kind of relegated more to my kind of like militaria collecting and all that kind of stuff because this handgun has been used by quite a few militaries in a variety of different configurations. But it seemed kind of appropriate to bring out my first competition handgun to my first IDPA competition. All right, now what holster did I run it out of? I ran it out of this Safariland inside the waistband holster, which is actually built for a Colt government model, but it will also fit the high power just fine. Absolutely no problem, as we can see there. Now, mag pouches wound up being a little bit of an issue. My mag pouches that I normally use are on my pistol belt, and that is where I wish for them to remain. I don't like playing musical gear with pouches and all that kind of stuff in between gear setups. I will pay the money to have something that I just can pick up and go with, instead of having to take the time to strip it off of something else and throw it onto what it is that I'm trying to work out of. So those pouches are staying exactly where they're at. I have a pistol rifle taco mag pouch combo that was supposed to be for if I was running off of my Core Essentials belt. However, that is a pretty large mag pouch combination and doesn't really meet with the conceal carry requirements. So what I wound up running after digging through my box of pouches was this magazine pouch here, which is a Velcro pouch, which is supposed to be, I suddenly became a very popular person for text messages right now. It's super awesome. This is supposed to be a vertical type set, or a horizontal type setup. Strip this back, strip the magazine out, and put it in. Now, I did run this in a reverse type setup. I think I might change that around this next time to peeling it this back and then stripping the magazine out. That way, I'll have to play around in my dry fire practice beforehand. Now, I did extensively dry fire practice with this setup because I had not run it in a while. And there's a couple of specific things about running this handgun, like the magazines don't drop free, so you have to strip them out, that I wanted to make sure that I got a good amount of practice on so that they were natural once it is that I got out onto range day. Now, of course, anyone who brings one gun to a competition or to a course or something along those lines is silly, because I've seen plenty of guns go down for a wide variety of reasons, and guys have to vacate, have to leave, have to, not get their money back or whatever because their gun broke. So you're out quite a bit of money at that point, not just the cost, but also the repair. And not just the cost of the match, but also the repair to the gun. So I also brought this Sig M11A1 chambered in 9mm. This gun also popped up in my Sig P229 video, which links will be in the description to all these videos that I've mentioned thus far. This gun I actually conceal carry quite a bit. For it, I brought out this inside the waistband Vetter holster, as well as this outside the waistband Vetter holster in case I needed a little bit more flexibility. Now, this holster, the clips are actually set up perfectly to be able to fit onto my Core Essentials EDC belt, which, by the way, belts are another thing that's regulated. It has to be something that fits into standard pants loops. So some of your battle belts and stuff like that out there may not necessarily qualify. This holster fits on there just fine. It does not fit onto my battle belt. And I also brought a button-down long sleeve shirt as an outer garment in case that actually wound up being something I had to do, be it because maybe this gun didn't conceal as well under my shirt, or somebody made a stink about me not wearing an outer garment or something along those lines. So I had myself pretty well set up to be able to go into this competition and do the best that I could do overall. All right, guys. What were some of my impressions from shooting IDPA under its rules? I had a couple of things. One, I appreciate their goal. However, gamesmanship always gets involved at some point, to some level. In my opinion, it would be the wearing of the outer garment and outside the waistband holsters and all that kind of stuff, because I would really argue whether or not somebody's effectively concealed carrying at that point and whether or not these guys are actually doing this every day. So there's a little gamesmanship right there all by itself. Going from there, there were a couple of weird match things that I noticed that were specific to the order of engagement. There was one stage where we had a variety of targets arrayed behind barriers, and you had your start position, and from there you would take out the first target and then move to the next array, up, 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 up. One of the big things about IDPA is if you expose yourself to a target, you have to engage that target. In the process of stepping into and engaging that first target, you exposed yourself to a target array that was further up the line from where you would have thought you were going to head next to in the engagement. It's more in like the middle. Now, in order to engage the first target, you had to open yourself up to that other target array, but you could not see that target array because you were threat focused at that point. So as you rolled back into cover from engaging that first target and then going back to scan for the next position you were going to go to, you could not see the target that you had apparently exposed yourself to. So that would be a procedural against you. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me for a couple of reasons. First off, let's say that happened in real life. I went to engage somebody and I opened myself up to another threat. If that person is actively being a threat, they're going to identify themselves as such by either A, calling out to me, or B, shooting at me. Well, fortunately in competitions, the cardboard targets don't shoot back. But how am I supposed to know if I can't see that target when I come back into cover that I have been exposed? We aren't lizards, our eyes don't move independently. How am I supposed to catch on to that? And that's where I consider that to be very much so a gotcha type moment built into the rules. And that has more to do with the rules than it does with actual engagements. Now, of course, we had a match walkthrough and all that kind of stuff and a talk through. And one of the big things in IDPA is that you're not allowed to air gun what it is that you would do in matches, but you're allowed to stand there and formulate a plan, which I also find kind of weird because I would think that they would discourage such practices. That at best you would get somebody to orient you to how the range works. Like, okay guys, we're gonna walk through, you got targets here, you got targets here, you got targets here, you got targets here. These are the number of rounds that are required on each one of these. You have a pop-up target that's gonna be over here, and then da-da-da-da-da. And then that would be it. We would all walk through together, everybody gets the same amount of exposure to the target array, and then you go back. I consider that to be very similar to if I enter a building and I go ahead and I identify like where exits are, or if I do a quick scan to see if there's anybody who looks nefarious, and I look over people, I keep an eye on the door or as people move around and stuff like that and see if anybody's acting weird. That would be very similar to the range walkthrough and maybe having an idea of where it is that I want to move or how it is that I'm going to position loved ones or something along those lines. It's kind of the same concept without being able to walk through and stare at each target for X amount of time and imagine the complete engagement exactly how it is that it's supposed to unfold. Now, there was also another thing that I kind of disagreed with, and this one I was actually even more so annoyed by, and that was sometimes with this high power, I inadvertently lock the slide to the rear while firing. And that's just getting that aggressive thumbs forward grip with where the slide catch is placed on this handgun. It's very easy to accidentally actuate it. So during the match that happened, and I immediately went into an emergency reload. But as I looked down at my gun, as I started to conduct my emergency reload, I saw that there were rounds in the magazine as it disappeared, as it got stripped out of the grip. One of the big things in IDPA is not leaving behind a loaded magazine. You can progressively load, you can be proactive in your reloading, but you have to retain that source of feed. You can't leave it lying on the ground. If you do so and tell the RO that your round's complete, stop my time, that will count against you as a procedural. You can, of course, run back to grab it after having engaged all the targets, but in my opinion, that also runs into the possibility of breaking the 90 or something along those lines and, incurring a pretty significant safety penalty at that point. So I accidentally stripped out that magazine. I fought through it, loaded up my next magazine, engaged that target, dropped down, grabbed that magazine, looked at the target, decided it needed more rounds, and then came up to shoot it again, going into my two-handed grip and still holding this magazine. Fired my rounds, stowed the magazine as I moved to the next target array, and then went on about my day. I got hit with a procedural for that because that's not a part of building a grip. And I'm really confused by that because I can build a grip any way I want to, as long as it's done safely. I can shoot this thing upside down if I want, as long as I don't flag myself or anybody else, as long as I don't break the safety rules. There's no real issue there. If I want to shoot this one-handed, I can. Why can I not shoot this with something in my hand? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I did not move the gun unsafely in doing so. At no point did it break any of the safety rules as I did it. Why would that count as a procedural? And I was actually looking through the rule book earlier, and maybe I need to look through it more thoroughly, but I didn't see anything along those lines. And I remember that my face definitely reflected my displeasure with that reckoning, but I'm also not going to argue with them because I get nothing out of it. I have no money at stake here. I'm not sponsored or anything along those lines to where I'm going to lose money on what it is that's happening. I'm just out there to work against myself. And if somebody thinks that, if that guy thinks that he's got a leg to stand on to say that I did something wrong and count time against me, okay, cool. I know what I did. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. All right, so what are some of my thoughts and impressions from my first time shooting IDPA? I gotta say, guys, going into it, IDPA came across as incredibly like boomer FUD to me. Specifically the outer garment requirement, which there's a lot of discussion of, like, weighing down your pockets and all that kind of stuff, which clearly points to having some sort of outer layer over top of your normal clothing. That's not normal. People don't dress like that anymore. That's very much so out of touch with the times. I am really happy that even though they kind of gave me that initial impression, they allow optics equipped pistols. They allow a wide variety of just modern adaptations. Appendix inside the waistband, that is legal in IDPA. That's fantastic. It should be. A lot of people get really stressed out because, in appendix inside the waistband, your gun's pointed at your junk. But anytime you're wearing a gun around your waist, it's pointed at some part of you. That's just the inherent hazard in carrying a gun. That's why you're supposed to be really careful in how it is that you conduct a draw and all those types of things. And you don't have your trigger in the finger guard until you're ready to shoot. You shouldn't be ready to shoot when it's still in the holster. So those aspects of IDPA are very... you take the good with the bad in this case. And seeing as I was allowed to be able to just wear a t-shirt and to conceal more or less how it is that I would normally conceal, that's not a big deal. It worked out great. I was not, as much as that might be a kind of outdated version or aspect of IDPA, it did not inhibit me in doing so. Now, not allowing 7-round capacity revolvers is weird to me. You would think that would be right up their line. Especially when we're talking about kind of the older style of dress and all that kind of stuff. You'd think that they would be 100% willing to accept 7-round capacity revolvers, but that's just kind of an oddity there. Maybe it'll get written into the rules at some other time. The fact that they have updated their rules somewhat with the times really makes me excited for this type of competition. And it is definitely something that I will plan to do again and just kind of, like I said before, take the good with the bad. All right, guys, this is a much longer video than I've done in recent times. I hope you guys found this interesting, and let me know if you want to hear a overall match breakdown, and I can do that for future matches as well if there's an interest. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers what I got. Have a good day.